What if the most dangerous man in England didn't seize power with an army, but with a whisper? This is the story of Hugh Despenser the Younger, the king's favorite, the shadow behind the throne, and the man whose greed and cruelty would drive a queen to raise an army against her own husband. Stay with me until the end, because his fall will be one of the most brutal and humiliating downfalls ever recorded in English history. Hugh Despenser the Younger was not born a kingmaker. Around 1286, he entered the world as the son of a respectable but not extraordinary noble family. His father, Hugh Despenser the Elder, had some influence, but nothing that foretold the heights or depths his son would reach. Everything changed with a marriage. In the early 14th century, Hugh wed Eleanor de Clare, granddaughter of King Edward I and niece of the reigning Edward II. This wasn't just a match of status. It was an open door into the royal family's inner circle. And Hugh didn't just step through that door. He slammed it shut behind him and made sure he was the only one standing next to the king. By 1318, he was appointed royal chamberlain, a position that gave him daily private access to Edward II. And from there, Hugh's influence grew like a creeping vine around the crown itself. The king seemed captivated by him, relying on his advice, his presence, and perhaps far more than mere friendship. Whatever the bond, it was strong enough to blind Edward to the damage Hugh was inflicting. Despenser's rise wasn't built on honor or loyalty. It was built on acquisition. Land, titles, wealth, especially in South Wales. He seized estates, often under dubious legal claims, stripping other nobles of their birthright and redistributing property to himself or his closest allies. In a time when noble honor was currency, this was theft in daylight. Chroniclers accused him of manipulating trials, silencing opposition, and bending royal justice to his will. The Vita Edwardi Secundi, a near-contemporary record, put it plainly. All men turned their hearts against him because of his pride and wrongdoing. But this wasn't mere jealousy. It was survival. Powerful men who had once stood as equals to the king were suddenly at Hugh's mercy, their fates sealed not in open battle, but in whispered counsel to the monarch. Parliament grew restless. The barons, already wary of royal favorites, now saw Despenser not just as an annoyance, but as a direct threat to their power, and to the stability of the kingdom itself. By 1321, the situation boiled over. A coalition of barons forced Edward to exile both Hugh and his father. For a moment, it seemed the realm had rid itself of its shadow ruler, but exile was a temporary inconvenience. In 1322, Edward recalled the Despensers and launched a merciless campaign of vengeance against their enemies. Hugh came back stronger than ever, no longer just the king's confidant, but his weapon. From then on, England was not truly governed from the throne, but from Despenser's ear. And when a whisper becomes a roar, history tells us such power never fades quietly. Yet in building his empire, Hugh made a mistake that would seal his fate. He believed power could shield him from consequence. He was wrong, because in the shadows, an unlikely alliance was forming, one that would bring him down in flames. And at its head was a queen. The year was 1425. England was restless, its nobility chafing under Hugh Despenser's suffocating grip. But the most dangerous threat to him wasn't a rebellious baron. It was a queen. Isabella of France, estranged wife of Edward II, had endured years of humiliation. Hugh's influence over the king had pushed her to the margins of power, stripping her of land, allies, and dignity. And she had no intention of fading quietly. Under the guise of diplomatic duty, Isabella sailed to France. But her true purpose was far more dangerous. To raise an army, in the glittering courts across the Channel she found a willing partner, Roger Mortimer, a powerful marcher lord who had once been imprisoned by Despenser himself. Their alliance was sealed by mutual hatred, and by something more personal, whispered about in the corridors of power. By September 1326, Isabella and Mortimer returned to England, not with a grand army, but with a small, disciplined force. They didn't need numbers. They had the hearts of a nation. As their ships landed, there was no resistance, only open gates. Nobles, clergy, merchants, and commoners alike rallied to their cause. Entire towns rose against Despenser. His rule, once enforced by fear, now crumbled like rotting timber. Edward I and Hugh fled west toward Wales, desperately seeking loyal ground. But loyalty had died. One by one, their strongholds fell. On November 16th, near the Welsh town of Llantrisant, Hugh Despenser the Younger was captured alongside the fugitive king. The man who had once ruled England from the shadows now stood alone, abandoned and utterly powerless. The Queen and her allies understood one thing clearly. Exile would not be enough. As long as Despenser lived, Edward's influence might return, and the people demanded justice, not behind closed doors, but in the full light of day. A trial was held, but the outcome was never in doubt. The charges were treason, theft, and tyranny, but in truth, his crime was something larger, having ruled in the king's name, yet against the realm's heart. November 24th, 1326. Hereford. A wooden scaffold loomed over the market square. Thousands gathered, not in grief, but in anticipation. Chroniclers would later write that his end brought joy to many. Stripped to the waist, Hugh was mocked with a crown of twisted nettles, a cruel reminder of the authority he had once worn so easily. Then, tied to a wooden hurdle, he was dragged through the mud and filth of the streets. This was political theater sharpened into a blade. He was hanged, but cut down before death could take him. Still conscious, he endured the full brutality of hanging, drawing, and quartering. His heart was torn from his chest and thrown into the flames. His body was beheaded, then divided into 4 pieces. His head was displayed on London Bridge, his limbs sent to York, Bristol, Dover, and Newcastle, a grim warning scattered to the corners of the realm. Edward I, imprisoned and broken, could only watch as the man he trusted above all others was annihilated, not just killed, but erased. Within a year, the king himself would be forced to abdicate. Soon after, he too would die in captivity under circumstances still debated by historians. The execution of Hugh Despenser the Younger remains one of the most chilling spectacles in English history. It was more than the death of a man. It was the public dismantling of tyranny. It showed that even those who stand closest to the throne can be torn down, piece by piece, when they mistake the king's favor for invincibility. And yet, it also reminds us that in history, vengeance can wear the mask of justice. Isabella's triumph removed a tyrant, yes, but it also set in motion a new cycle of power, intrigue, and blood. Perhaps that is the oldest truth of all. In the game for a crown, there are no final victories, only temporary thrones.